That's the question. I truly have not looked at the LSAT in over 20 years. So I'd like to get your sense. So what exactly is the LSAT testing on, right? So to give me a little bit of the background and maybe help some of my audience who hasn't reached that point yet.
Yeah, sure. So the LSAT is ultimately testing critical thinking skills as well as the ability to make deductions. So if you're given a situation, a given argument, a given fact set, what can you reasonably infer from that set of facts and what can't you reasonably infer? As human beings, we're often prone to some classic logical fallacies, some common errors or mistakes in our way of thinking. And sometimes that can be a bug rather than a feature. And the LSAT plays on that and your ability to go beyond your original native programming, so to speak. Then on the game section, you're given a set of different facts and you're required to make certain deductions based on those facts. And I would imagine that here in particular, there may be some connections to what you're doing in law school. I think a lot of law school, I understand, is about fact patterns and seeing whether you can apply a particular principle to a given situation. And the LSAT is kind of like a mini version of that.
So let me ask you, Steve. So again, and I haven't looked at this in a long time. So how many sections are there in the LSAT? What's kind of the format?
Sure, to get more specific with it, there are 4 scored sections on the LSAT. One of them is the analytical reasoning or logic game section, where these are kind of like short puzzles, and you're required to create symbols and mathematically combine certain variables and certain rules and derive certain consequences. That's the most mathematical of the sections and typically the most scary to law applicants at first because it's so unfamiliar, but it often ends up being test takers' favorite sections. One of their favorite sections by the end, it certainly has been for me. And the 2 sections are logical reasoning, which are short arguments, like kind of bite-sized paragraphs. Each question is standalone, testing your ability to evaluate these arguments. And finally, there's a reading comprehension section, which overall will appear to be similar to SAT or ACT reading comprehension, although the emphasis is more on arguments rather than information.
Great. So obviously, people need to get high scores on the LSAT because that either gets them into a top law school, a better law school, and if they go to a lesser law school, get some scholarship money. So either way, there's an incentive to do well. So what kind of mindset does somebody need to do well on the LSAT?
Ultimately, it comes around to what I was saying a bit about before, a critical and skeptical mindset, where you're not just taking everything that's stated at face value, but rather you're challenging, you're looking for weaknesses, you're looking for gaps and holes in a given argument. And that's what any test taker is going to want to do. But especially for those who are seeking higher scores, it's going to require not only understanding how to apply strategies that myself or another LSAT instructor could teach you, but rather understanding why the strategies work. Kind of like the beginning of a math textbook chapter, they'll explain how the formula is derived. And so you want to be able to not only blindly apply a formula, but understand how it's created and why it works the way it does.
So you believe people can increase their score, right? So the people who design these tests, they're supposed to test raw intelligence. So can you really improve your performance? Can you do better by studying? And how do you recommend studying for the LSAT if you can make a significant improvement in your score?
Yeah, sure. So first off, it's absolutely possible to improve your score, sometimes significantly, if you can adopt this mindset and change your previous ways of thinking. If you study over a longer period, at least 3 to 6 months, you'll be more likely to make significant gains. I know it's possible. I've walked many students through the process, and I've also done it myself. I had my own journey where I started in the low 150s, and gradually over a long period of time, actually an entire year, I was able to raise my score to a 175. And it took a lot of work. Yeah, it was pretty grueling. And that's part of why I ended up loving this exam, because I came to see the exam from the test maker's point of view. So it's absolutely possible. And I have many stories of past students and test takers on my site. I call them LSAT diaries, where they actually write in with their own experiences, showing their score increases. But ultimately, what it's going to take is using real LSAT questions, real previously administered LSAT exams, and putting in the work. a lot of times students will use explanations as a crutch. And while explanations are valuable, it's ultimately not a substitute for your own thought process and changing it.
It's interesting. I'll share one story. So I have a former colleague of mine, law school professor, and very, very intelligent. And, when I found out what law school he went to, it was a lower tier law school, which surprised me because he was an intelligent guy. So I started asking, well, tell me about your LSAT experience. Well, he bought a prep book the weekend before. He sat for the LSAT, and that's what he did. That was his studying. It seemed like he just didn't know any better because he had the mental. In fact, after his first year, he did so well. He had the opportunity of transferring to much better law schools. But he made that decision because at the beginning stages at the LSAT level, he just didn't know. He didn't understand the process. And you find that there are a lot of people like that just don't appreciate the value of a more systematized way of studying.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's what often happens. A lot of students will get faulty or outdated advice, sometimes from a pre-law advisor saying something like, just take the LSAT, see how you do, then decide whether it's worth investing in a course or something like that. But students, they take it, and surprise, surprise, they do terribly. And that's because the LSAT is something new. It's like learning a foreign language. It's not like it's just a harder version of the SAT. It's completely different in nature. And so students are often in for a rude awakening when they take it with no prep. And then they say, oh my God, I'm a total idiot. I'm screwed for law school. My life is over. When in reality, they just haven't invested the work yet. But if you put in at least a couple of months, you can gain a significant understanding in all areas of the exam. The exam just repeats itself again and again. I have seen questions that are virtual copies of each other. So if you study the old exams, you'll be in a great position to face whatever you end up facing on test day.
Now, as far as the amount of time, so in my case, I had the luxury of being able to prep for an entire summer. So I took that summer between my junior and senior year of college, and bought a prep course. What I thought was a decent course at the time. Did the practice exams, and it got me a high enough score to get me into an elite law school. So what do you recommend as far as timing? When do you start? How long before the exam?
Yeah, great question. So law school is conducted on a rolling admissions basis. So similar to college, though, it starts in the fall. So ideally, you want to have the LSAT done over the summer so that when applications open up in the fall, you can be among the first to apply. So I would say ideally, this year it's offered in June and July. So I take it one of those dates and then apply first thing in the fall. However, if you're watching this after that, that's okay. You've got the fall. You could take it in September and still apply fairly early. You could take it in November or December and still apply fairly early as well. What changes is that maybe there's a little bit less scholarship money available. Ultimately, it doesn't make a huge difference though, since law schools are waitlisting more and more applicants these days. But my biggest advice would be take it earlier rather than later and start thinking about prepping earlier rather than later. If you can take it in March, then you have June as a backup. If you take it in June, then you have July as a backup, et cetera. And no matter what, you can still apply towards the beginning of the cycle. However, if you need to apply later, no big deal. It's not the end of the world.
Now, what about when do you start prepping? So obviously you want to start prepping early. Are we talking a few months before the exam, a year before the exam? When's the ideal? Or, and obviously we don't always get to the ideal, but how much time do we realistically need?
Realistically, I would say the average student should spend 3 to 6 months studying for this exam. And so if you're watching this in January or February, you might set a target date of June or July, for example. Mm-hmm. And you kind of just work backwards. And if that requires delaying your law school applications, so be it. It's worth applying later in the cycle with a higher score than earlier with a lower score. Even just a couple of points can make an enormous difference in getting more scholarship money or getting into a better school. And so the return on investment in just a little bit of a delay or investing in prep materials is well worth it. And if you decide that you want to wait a cycle and apply at the beginning of the following one, that's also great too, and even ideal, I would say.
So you're mentioning materials. So what do you mean by materials? I mean, what does a student who's preparing for the LSAT need?
The number one thing that you absolutely need are real official LSAT prep tests. They're published by the Law School Admission Council. They're available on Amazon, most of them in books of 10 exams for about $20 each. And so I'd recommend getting the most recent couple of those. And then the individual exams, which are closer to $8 or $10 each, you have to buy separately. And students often hem and haw about spending more money on books, but it's really just a drop in the bucket. If one more exam or one more book gets you a single point, it could pay off with scholarship money. Like I said, thousands of dollars we're talking. So it's really a no-brainer when you think about it from that perspective. Don't cheat yourself by having not enough material. But aside from that, there's nothing else you absolutely need. I have a variety of prep materials, study guides, schedules, cheat sheets, checklists, etc. on my site. I also have a course. I'm not saying you need any of that, but if going alone with the exams and free resources online is not enough for you, then it makes sense to go elsewhere for additional help.
It's interesting. So I served on one of the law schools I've taught at, was on the admissions committee for a number of years, was chair of that committee. And I can assure you, we had cutoffs for scholarship money, and if you were on one side of that line, it's 100% ride. On the other side of that line, it was a 50% ride. So, we're talking, in today's terms, an extra $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 in tuition money based on one numerical score difference. So
it's remarkable. It's remarkable. It's just a single number, a single point more. There's an element of randomness on the exam too, of course. And the fact that it could go one way one day, another way another day, all that means is that it's worth retaking if you have the time in your timeline. Because single point, another couple hours of your time makes an enormous difference. It really does.
So now you've been working with students for a long time. You've been doing this.
So I've been coaching the LSAT now for over 10 years. I just hit the 10-year mark with my website this past November. And I'm still going strong with it. Love what I do. Love working with students. Love creating videos and resources. This is my passion.
So what do you find is some of the common mistakes people make when they're actually taking the LSAT or preparing for the LSAT?
One of the biggest mistakes I see when taking the LSAT under real world test day conditions, either during practice or the real thing, is getting bogged down on a single question. You start trying to reason through this question and nothing is clicking, and you keep investing second after second, minute after minute, and you're not making headway. But the problem is all questions are worth the same amount, although they're not all of equal difficulty. And so if question number 17 is giving you trouble, if you're not making headway, just skip it, come back to it later with a fresh perspective. You can break out of that tunnel vision and see the question in a new way, turn it from wrong to right or from a guess to right. And I'll do this with maybe 3 to 6 questions per section. I'll skip them and come back later just because I don't like the looks of it the first time around, and it's not clicking for me initially. And so having that mindfulness and that self-control to step away from the question and come back later, I think is a strategy that a lot of students would be well served by adopting.
Great. Now, you mentioned earlier that the LSAT can be learned. It's just understanding the mindset of the test creators. So somebody buys a book, they do the practice exams, they get a course like yours. What value does a one-on-one tutoring session do for people? So they've done all the other stuff. How do you take them to that next level?
So self-studying is great. It's risen in popularity in recent years with the rise of free and low-cost resources. But the problem is that you can't see your own blind spots. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so I'll sometimes meet with students and they'll reach out to me maybe just a few months before the exam when they've already been studying for several months. And within 10 minutes or even 5 minutes of speaking with them, I can point out and correct some misconceptions they have about a particular question type or a way to approach something. So I can help spot ways they could improve their approach or the inefficiency of their studying. And it's easy to go it alone when you have all the internet and all the resources it offers. But when you work with someone like myself, you're getting the benefit of over 10 years of experience and obsession with this topic. And having brought thousands of students through the process, there are certain common patterns and trends and things to look for. And so I would say if you're considering it, definitely try it out at least an hour or two with anyone. There's plenty of great tutors out there, but try someone out, see if it fits, see if it makes a difference. Because again, just a single comment they make could change everything for you.
It's funny, you're mentioning that story. So I was working with a student at Harvard Law School a few weeks ago, and bright kid, obviously got into Harvard, did well, did all those, things to get him in. And course, they don't provide a lot of advice once you're in law school. So kind of like you were saying, right? So I was able to see his blind spots. He rewrote the essay for me. He got it right. But it's just great seeing that aha moment with the student, and he just didn't see it. I mean, just he needed, as you say, kind of that guidance, somebody to, you don't know what you don't know, and you need that one-on-one guidance. So any other thoughts here before we wrap this up? I like what you're doing. It sounds exciting. I like to see somebody following their passion. Looked at your website and your videos. And by the way, if you haven't checked out his YouTube channel,
it's LSAT blog. So just YouTube LSAT blog.
My apologies, LSAT blog. And it is a lot of material, games, study strategies. I was very impressed by what you're doing on YouTube, Steve.
Thanks, Bono. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you today. I guess the single thing I would leave students with is that a single insight can change everything. So if you're having trouble with the LSAT, don't give up. Reach out to others for help. Seek out additional resources, because sometimes there's just one little thing that can make it all click for you and make that difference. So thank everyone for watching. Please come over, check out my channel if you're not already there. Have a lot of free resources, and I'm happy to help however I can.
Sounds great. And I'll put the link to the right spot down in the comment section. Take care, Steve. Pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks, Beau. Same. Take care.